From the Oregon State University's Extension Service, you are listening to In the Woods with the Forestry and Natural Resources Program. This podcast aims to share the voices of researchers, land managers, and members of the public interested in telling the story of how woodlands provide more than just trees. They provide interconnectedness that is essential to your daily life. Stick around to discover a new topic related to forests on each episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to In the Woods podcast, presented by the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Program at Oregon State University. I am your host, Jacob Putney, Assistant Professor of Practice and Extension Agent in the College of Forestry. This month's episode is going to provide a general introduction to woodland management. We're going to cover a variety of things, but overall, I'll look at what forest and woodland management means, why a woodland might need managing, using management to accomplish a variety of objectives. We are joined today by my colleague, Glenn Ahrens. Glenn is an assistant professor in the College of Forestry and an extension agent for Clackamas, Marion, and Hood River counties. Glenn is also the director of the Hardwood Silviculture Cooperative. Glenn, you've had quite the career in extension. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself, your career, and maybe some of the projects you've been working on?
Yeah, Jake, I'd be happy to. And thanks for having me on. Well, I grew up in San Diego, California, and I early on found myself attracted to mountains and forests and streams that we didn't have nearby. So often got out into the backcountry. And early on, I decided for some reason in the 8th grade that I wanted to be a forester of some kind. I worked in a career center. I kind of looked at what that might be. So I ended up going to Humboldt State University in Northern California, and then to Oregon State, the real hub for forestry on the West Coast, and got my master's at Oregon State. And I started out in forestry research, but pretty early on in my career, I decided on extension and working with, helping people use the science and research on the ground. That was really my main goal. So about 20 years ago, I actually got my first job as an extension forester out on the north coast of Oregon. And then I've been over here in Clackamas, Marion, Hood River County territory since 2012. And here, when I moved to Clackamas, really big part of our lives here in extension, and particularly in Clackamas, is the annual Clackamas Tree School. So a big part of my work and very rewarding part has been helping to put together this Clackamas Tree School every year, and even during COVID times, as an online series. So look forward to doing that soon in person. And also, and since the 2020 fires, have burned so much of my territory, but also lots of the West, been very busy trying to help people with recovery, reforestation after fire, and of course, a major effort to help people be prepared for wildfire in the future. So that's what brought me to the present day.
Oh, the 8th grade. Oh, that's awful proactive of you. I don't think I knew what I wanted to do until I got to college, really. That's great. So the past couple episodes that we've covered here on this podcast have really been laying the foundation in terms of what a woodland is, how they grow, resources they provide, and how they're influenced. But let's talk about the human influence. What do we mean when we say we're going to manage a woodland or a forest stand?
Well, management usually involves some kind of an action to direct the course of events, right? And managing a woodland involves taking some action to direct the course of the forest, its growth, its development, the vision that you might have. How do you reach that? So it's taking an action in order to meet the landowner's goals and objectives. That's the bottom line for what we mean about managing a forest. So
I guess, why would someone need to do that? Why would you need to manage a woodland? And, what might happen if someone didn't manage? Thinking about like active or passive management types or styles.
Yeah, and that's often a big question. A lot of folks might think that forests have been doing fine on their own and can take care of themselves, and nature will take its course. And we certainly have great examples of beautiful forests that haven't been managed with, at least not obviously so. So we often perceive the need to manage a woodland, when we're not satisfied with the current condition. If you evaluate what you're looking at or where you think the forest is headed, and that there might be a problem in the future, you're worried about, forest health or something not meeting your objectives, then you think about intervening, about taking action, to correct that or to guide the forest to more towards meeting your goals and objectives. The kinds of things that people might see as well, it's a young forest being established and there's not enough trees of the right species. So I need to plant more trees of a desirable species. The weeds or the brush or unwanted things are taking over. So it needs some action to remedy that. Then a few years down the road, you have young forest stands that are overcrowded. And a lot of folks can see, patches of trees that look like they're really crowded and perhaps, stagnating in a way or interfering with, good development. So we might want to thin them out. Or you look at a patch of trees and you say, well, there's only one species in that patch, and maybe I want more diversity. Or there's not enough daylight on the forest floor. I'd like to see more herbs and wildflowers. So a lot of things that people might see that they perceive, to be not the desirable condition. And so we want to manage it and change that towards something more desirable. And then, one of the big things that's on a lot of folks' mind is forest health. Is this forest headed for trouble? We see some trees dying, perhaps. Should we do something? Can we do anything to improve forest health? Or particularly, fire hazards and concerns about that is often a primary, impetus for managing forests to reduce fire hazards, for example.
So you mentioned goals and objectives a few times there, and I think you alluded to them a little bit, but what are the kind of objectives that someone could manage for, and how do you decide which ones to prioritize?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's often the first and hardest part of starting, a consultation is, people ask, what should I do with my forest? Oftentimes before they even tell you what they think they want. And so you always start with, well, what are your goals? What are your objectives? Because you have a lot of choices, and forests can develop in a lot of different directions depending. The kinds of things, I think it's helpful sometimes to just make a list or discuss the wide range of possibilities. Ask people what's on their minds, but also give them a list to maybe prompt them for some of the things that they might desire. Beauty, privacy, recreation, wildlife habitat, wildlife appreciation, timber value, land investment, legacy for the future. I just want to be a good steward of the land. I want to keep forests healthy. Maintaining forest health and being a good land steward is often a real overall goal that many landowners have. Conservation, ecosystem, health and diversity. Those are all the kinds of things you might think about. And then oftentimes the trouble is, really elucidating those and clarifying what each of those means. And particularly if there's more than one person deciding on the goals and objectives, and then of course the management actions, it's important then to reach some kind of consensus or agreement on those primary goals and those priorities, what comes first, especially when there's a conflict between one goal and another.
That's quite the list. Another one I was just thinking of is carbon too. That's been kind of a hot topic lately, is managing for carbon sequestration and things like that. So
that's right.
What you're saying is that, defining your management objectives and your goals is really that crucial first step. But, what comes next? Say I define my management goals, I prioritize them. It's like, what do I do next? Where do I start?
So once you do have a set of goals and objectives, which may evolve over time, but you start somewhere, then you really need to take stock of the current conditions or update your picture of how the forest is doing, how it's situated. And that, of course, you get down into the details, what kind of forest do you have? And as it changes across the land, you end up, identifying different types and maybe delineating different patches that have different history, different age, different species. So really, taking inventory and mapping out your current conditions, and then adding the idea of how is it going to grow and change, because forests don't stay the same. They are growing and changing, and sometimes rapidly, especially in the younger ages when it's really pretty obvious, over a 5 or 10 year period, a lot of change will occur. You have to evaluate those conditions and then kind of match them up with your goals and decide if there's any action needed, because in some of those patches of forest, they may be just fine and not really needing our intervention, so to speak. And this can get really involved if you think about, many acres of forest and a wide variety of types. getting to know those types and actually getting them pretty well mapped and taking the inventory can be a pretty involved process. And as we'll discuss, you can get help with that. But it's also, kind of the pleasure, and it's going to take time, and people that really love their land and their forests, I think they really appreciate taking their time and learning over time, getting to know the land, the soils, the climate, the growing conditions, particularly, when it's ruled by sort of those extreme conditions, like the heat wave we just had, or like the ice storms or floods, or, the coldest year, the hottest year. Those things often really direct the forest development. And it takes time to see, how that works, as well as the kind of average conditions that you want to know about. So it takes years. And I think the more people learn about their forests and perhaps learn about the challenges, the limitations, as well as those opportunities, they learn new things, and they may change their outlook on what's important. So they might end up going back and changing their goals. So it's really kind of this, I call it the forest management planning circle or cycle. It takes time, but it's often quite rewarding.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to our episode on how forests grow, and how we talked about the different stand development changes or part of those cycles, and how disturbance and things like that influences that. So I imagine that has an influence on a management cycle as well. So we have our goals, and we have kind of an idea of what we might need to do at each of these stages of forest development. But should we keep record of all of this? And how do you keep track of everything?
Right. That can't always stay in one person's head, and you can't recall every little detail about that. So keeping records can be very important. And as I was mentioning, some of those elements of what would be nice to know, about the different patches of vegetation, and where are they, and what are the boundaries, and how many acres is it, and what's inside of it, how many trees, and what kind of trees, all that information pretty soon is going to be an overwhelming amount to just keep in one's head. It's surprising how many people do just have it all in their head and don't have it written down or even mapped that well. But clearly, when it comes to looking at acres and the diversity of forests across the acreage, having the maps, the photos, then the written documentation or stored on a computer, it's going to be really essential for keeping track of all that. And then if you think about the over time, the changes that are going to occur, well, if you start now with one part of your forest that's being established in the sort of 0 to 10 year age class, well, 10 or 20 years go by. How did it start? Where is it going? What's its current condition? And you need to update those records, obviously. So that's where a good written plan, and also more and more the computerized records, the mapping and data management tools that we have on our computers or even on our cell phones these days are really helpful for keeping track of this kind of information. And if you think about it, not only for your own sake, if you are the decision maker, let's say, but clearly for others, for your consultants, for your family, for the rest of your co-owners, if you're in a group, it's going to be essential to have a good track and good record keeping.
Yeah, I try to take notes on everything, and thinking about doing an entry or some type of management every 10 to 20 years. I can remember what I did 10 years ago. Your forests on the west side go a little bit faster than ours over here on the east side of Oregon, but still, I think keeping records is a really great idea. So it really sounds like there's a lot of moving parts. Thinking about what your management objectives are, your goals, prioritizing them, taking some sort of inventory or a look at what different forest types, compositions, structures are on your forest, and then kind of coming up with a plan to management to meet those objectives. It sounds like there's really a lot of moving parts. So really, who could someone go to if they wanted help in determining if they need to manage or developing a plan, or if they need help identifying some of their goals and objectives?
Well, I could be biased, but I think a great place for people to go for help is their extension forester. And part of the reason I say that is because our job is really to be an objective and educational consultant, and to help people learn what they need to learn to be able to make a good decision. And once they have, then they can know better when do they do things themselves, what's within their capabilities to take care of, when would they hire a professional, what kind of professional, what questions do you ask when you're looking for the right professional to help you with, with mapping or inventory, a timber cruise, an appraisal, looking at maybe doing some harvesting or marketing. What about roads? How about consulting about your streams and your fish habitat? I mean, there's so many different interesting and also challenging aspects of managing a forest. And there's a lot of great expert advisors out there, and some of them for a fee and some of them are free. But, starting with extension, we can really help people kind of figure out where to go next and what they can do themselves and who they might like to hire. And then when you get down to that work that's involved, making the good maps, getting good aerial photos, being able to kind of map out where your different types of forests are, figuring out the acreages, the details of what kind of inventory, how good does it need to be within a forest type, especially if there's really high values at stake, timber value, wildlife habitat, roads, those kinds of things. Then there's going to be some really key decisions for someone to make about hiring a professional to help. And outside of their extension forester, as far as public assistance paid for by your tax dollars, you could look towards the Oregon Department of Forestry. Again, a great resource, and they do slightly different kinds of things and get more into the details of technical forestry and also, the laws and the rules. Soil and water conservation districts, which vary county to county, but often are just a wealth of good sources of assistance. And here in my county, a lot of times you can sit down with your soil and water conservation district person, and they can, help you map this out and help you get a good set of, overlays of topography and streams and roads and air photos and things, which, is easy enough to do on your own these days on the internet, but it's nice to sit down with a professional who has good tools that can help with that. The USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. And then, of course, you get to hiring professionals like forestry consultants and forest practitioners, forest contractors that do planting and management, all that. But we kind of start out, providing guidance for, when do you need that? What should you expect? And how do you go about hiring the right people?
One thing you mentioned that I didn't really think about just yet was the Oregon Forest Practices Act. And it sounds like the Stewardship Forester, the Oregon Department of Forestry, could really help out with that. But what kind of things might be in the Oregon Forest Practices Act that would affect like management or your management planning, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly provided. The Oregon Forest Practices Act and the rules derived from the law are really the kind of the backdrop and the the boundary of minimum standards for protecting public resources. Fish, wildlife, air, water, some of those public benefits of the forests that maybe private forests that we're managing for our own objectives. And then those rules, not only are they a backstop or a standard, they also provide assurance to the public that people are doing a reasonably good job of protecting the forests and the resources. So that's one aspect of that. Working with the Department of Forestry, they will give you specific advice, and their goal is to help you understand those rules and comply with them, but they're also there to help you just meet your own objectives, with the rules kind of as a backdrop. There's a nice resource that is useful for kind of understanding where these rules come in, because they apply to any kind of timber harvesting operation, especially protecting streams with, buffers and riparian areas, applying forest chemicals, use of fire, use of power tools, especially during fire season. There's a lot of different aspects of forest management that come up against, the rules. There's the illustrated forest practices, the Oregon Forest Protection Laws, the illustrated manual, which is a nice resource that you can go to without having to, call the forester right off. You can just read it and look at it in a nice visual, description of the forest practice rules and where they apply. So I'd certainly advise people to go to that. And you can get a hard copy of that as a book too, which is real nice, as well as seeing it online.
Yeah, I really like that illustrated guide. I always keep a copy of it somewhat handy so I can reference it, especially if folks have questions. We did touch on the stream rules a little bit in the water episode. That was a couple episodes ago. But there's definitely a lot more information in there. And I think it might be on our website, but if it's not, I'll make sure to get that on. But speaking of resources, what other resources could someone use if they wanted to learn more about management or planning or things like that?
Well, certainly delving within our Oregon Forest Management Planning resources, Extension and the other partners in forestry education, particularly Department of Forestry. Also, I should mention the Oregon Forest Resource Institute has a lot of resources and does a lot of work on educational resources for woodland owners. So, we put our heads together and we have a nice website right now that we can direct people to that really guides you through kind of the steps of, getting to know your land and working on your goals and objectives, and then getting down to the details of forest management planning. So that's a good online resource. Another great way just to learn as you go, and what we're big on in Extension is getting people together with other experienced woodland owners, often partnering with the Small Woodlands Association in Oregon, your local chapters through the Oregon Tree Farm System. And there's other opportunities, getting groups of folks together that have been taking care of forests and sharing and learning from each other is a great way to learn more about forest management. And then also we have in Extension, we have master woodland managers who are really the more motivated and kind of public service oriented woodland owners who not only learn for themselves, but then want to share with their neighbors and other woodland owners. So, what they've learned. And so we have trained volunteers as well to help. I don't think there's a good substitute for really getting together on a field tour or a demonstration or a workshop and having a range of experience. So not only a professional educator like myself or a forester, but also then having, a diversity of woodland owners who have maybe different perspectives and sharing what they've done and what worked for them and what didn't, and how they solve their problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that's really great.
And there's always the internet. A lot of our resources are on the internet. But
speaking of the internet, I mean, the Tree School Online, there was a ton of different webinar episodes that are still available online, and it covers a wide variety of topics from non-timber forest products, to taxes and everything else in between. Right, and I certainly I can't quite separate myself from the internet these days, spending so much time on my computer when I'd rather be out in the woods. But more and more of our good educational material is being produced and delivered via the internet. But of course, there's a lot of other information on the internet, and not all of it is credible or based on good information. So certainly I would tend to direct people towards credible sources, and certainly in Extension, we strive to be one of the good, credible sources of information, and we have lots of good stuff online. But there's plenty of other organizations that have credible information online as well that people can learn from. Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Glenn. Management just really includes so many different factors, and as this podcast moves forward, and we're going to try to touch on each of them in more detail. But we hope you got a sense of the basics of what it means to manage a woodland. Don't hesitate to send us a comment or a question about this month's episode, especially if something came up as you were listening that you'd like to hear more about. The best way to reach us is at our website at inthewoodspodcast.com. Glenn, I know you're an expert on this, so we might have to bring you back on to cover some more. But before we finish this episode, we can't forget to do what we are calling our lightning round, or where we ask a few questions of our guests. So Glenn, first question here, what is your favorite tree?
So first I have to think about, are you talking about one tree, a particular tree, or are we talking about a species of tree? But I'm going to take liberty and do both. So a favorite tree is, it's actually a pepper tree that my parents planted about the time I was born, and we grew up together. And it grew faster than I did, and I was climbing that tree as a youngster and falling out of the tree, and it got pretty tall pretty quick. And to my knowledge, it's still healthy and still growing over 60 years later. So that is one tree that stands out in my mind as a favorite tree. then I have to say, as a forester, and particularly for my lifelong experience in the forest, Douglas fir has played such a big role in my life as a forester. And I've been a West Coast forester primarily. Really haven't practiced forestry further east than Idaho, Montana. So Douglas fir has always been there in most of the forests. And it has so many forms from, north to south, coast to mountains. I've seen it down near Mexico and up deep in British Columbia in the far north. I've seen 10-foot diameter trees that were 900 years old. Amazing plantings of Douglas fir, even in my life. They're 40 years old and becoming a forest. So I'll pick Douglas fir as my favorite species.
No, I think that Douglas fir is really just an iconic species here in the Pacific Northwest and has such a wide range and such a variety of conditions that it grows in. But it's interesting that you bring up your favorite tree, not favorite tree species. I haven't had anybody comment on that before. I'd have to take a minute and think about what my favorite tree is. That's really hard to pick just one. But anyways, we'll move on here to our second question. So what is the most interesting thing you bring with you in the field, whether in your cruiser vest or other field gear?
Well, I think that I put too much thought into that. My first response was, one of the tools in a cruiser's vest. So I thought, well, the increment core, that's a pretty neat tool because you can core a tree and look into the past and learn a lot about how a tree has grown over its life and what's happening to it recently, good times and bad times. But then I thought harder about it and I said, well, the thing I bring to the woods that's most interesting is an inquiring mind and struggling to be, open to learning. So sometimes you get set in your ways and you may not be open and you just look at things the same old way and see the same old things, especially when you go back, to doing the same thing for 40 years like I have. So better yet, not only with my mind, but to bring a companion with me that has maybe a different perspective to see things differently and help me learn new things. So that's what I want to bring into the woods.
No, I think that's a really good one, Glenn. Sometimes, you got to see the forest for the trees. And sometimes I'm in the woods with an objective. I'm trying to work on something and I need to take a minute to think about what's around me and what's really going on. The last question here is about resources. We covered a lot of them already, but is there anything else that you would recommend to our listeners to check out if they're interested in learning more about woodland management or planning or anything in between?
I think digging deeper into the knowledge that's out there in the different fields. We were talking about water quality or stream protection rules or, effects of wildfire, climate change. So really exploring, especially starting with the internet, but maybe finding people that there's so many great ways that people are telling stories and really articulate and well-researched and fascinating stories out there with a lot of good visuals. So look for those things maybe through the university or through other kinds of learning institutes. There's a lot of nonprofit groups. A lot of them have different agendas, but you kind of read their opening webpage and then kind of see what they're at. And then they have a lot of great stories and visuals. So I exploring there, but then maybe finding some people. Like just the other day, I was researching forest recreation, and how do you value the recreational aspects of forests? And I haven't really looked at that real hard lately. I've kind of been focused on woodland owner education a lot for maybe a long time. And, I found a paper by Randy Rosenberger all about forest risk, recreation values and really extensive research on trying to understand the value of forest to people for recreation and health and peace of mind. Anyway, just found a whole bunch of new resources and I emailed him and he sent me a lot of great links to new things. So find the people and send them an email or give them a call and ask them about it at OSU or any other, institution for education.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good tip, Glenn. Well, all right, everyone. This is going to conclude this month's episode. Glenn, thank you again so much for joining us today. And we will see you all next month. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on our website, inthewoodspodcast.com. We would love to hear from you. Visit the Tell Us What You Think tab on our website to leave us a comment, suggest a guest or topic, or ask a question that can be featured in a future episode. And also, give us your feedback by filling out our survey. In the Woods was created by Lauren Grant, Jacob Putney, Carrie Berger, Jason O'Brien, and Stephen Fitzgerald, who are all members of the Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Team. Episodes are edited and produced by Kellen Soriano. Music for In the Woods was composed by Jeffrey Hino, and graphic design was created by Christina Freehoff. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we can't wait to talk to you again next month. Until then, what's in your woods?